Alrighty, so today what we're going to make is called Pongal. It's a traditional South Indian dish with rice and some kind of lentils. In this particular case, we're using mung dal, but you can use, pretty much whatever you have on hand. I've actually seen the dish made with even like black-eyed peas, and it comes out quite lovely. This is a variation on a classic. With the classic version, there's only two spices. You use cumin seed and whole black peppercorns. Now, personally, I don't care for that version just because I find the whole black peppercorns to be a bit jarring when I'm biting into them. But if that's the version, if you want to go classic traditional, like super traditional, go ahead and make that version. I'll basically walk you through how to do that version. And also, traditionally, you're supposed to use white rice, not brown rice. And in this particular case, I'm using what's called red cargo rice. It's a Thai jasmine brown rice type of thing. Really tasty. It's a new experience for me, so we're going to see how this works out and see if it's still delicious. And the mung dal, I already pre-cooked because I wanted to sort of speed this along and get from start to finish much more quickly. And in this version, I'm going to use ground black pepper because I don't care for the whole peppercorns. Traditional version does have asafoetida. This is the brand that I use. It's called LG. It's pretty much ubiquitous in South Indian kitchens. Everybody has it. And in my version, I like peanuts. That is also a traditional add-in, but it is strictly optional. You don't have to add them if you don't have them. You can also use cashews instead of peanuts. Those would go great. Doesn't work so great with almonds or walnuts or pistachios, so I would prefer that you don't go down that road if you can help it. And we're using grated ginger. This is I grated it with my microplane grater, and curry leaves, which sometimes on, sometimes off. It's not always used, but in my versions I generally prefer it. And because the rice is cooked, to perfection, it's kind of separate and, slightly sticky, but not, overcooked. Yeah, it should cook perfectly. I'm gonna add some extra water because I want this to get to the proper texture of bungal, which is a little bit on the mushy side. You don't have to, you can make it a little bit more separate if you feel like it, but in most versions I've tasted, I tend to prefer them to be a little bit more on the mushy side. Same thing goes for the dal. You can cook it until it's just done, but I've taken it all the way to like mush because I want that texture that we're going for. Two more ingredients that we're going to add, which I forgot to set out for you guys. One is turmeric. You don't traditionally add turmeric, but I like it in there. Other one is, of course, salt. So why don't we get this going, and we'll take a look at some of the processes that go through to make this delicious. Okay, so what we have here is there's some oil heating in the pan. I'm using like almost like a wok-shaped situation. You can use whatever you have, but this makes it easy for me to get everything in there. And like I said, I'm using vegetable oil. You can use peanut oil, canola oil, corn oil. I'm using corn oil in particular. And if you're going to add peanuts or any other kinds of nuts, the first step is to actually fry them lightly in the oil so that they get like a nice toasty brown color. I have myself at like a medium-high heat at the moment, and we're going to wait for these peanuts to get a little bit toasty and good smelling. So I'm going to give that just a few minutes, and then we'll take it out and set it aside so that they'll be toasty tasting. And while I'm here, let me also talk about some of the other ingredients that I'm going to be using today. The traditional version, like I mentioned, uses only cumin seed and black pepper and maybe some asafoetida, but that's about as far as it'll go. In my case, I'm going to be using mustard seed as well, just because I like it, as well as some sesame seed because I like it. It is not at all traditional to be going down that road, but I'm going with what tastes good to me. Same like with the turmeric. It's not traditional to go down that road to use turmeric, but I like it, so I'm going to use it. So again, you can customize this to your liking. I even know some people who like to add some vegetables to the mix, just to make it a little bit healthier. That's also an option if you want to go down that road. And as we can see in that couple of minutes that we started, talking about this aside, you can already see the peanuts starting to get a little toasty. And it looks like by accident I used my garlic infused corn oil instead of just regular corn oil, which I'm not mad at. It still smells really, really lovely. What I do is that I take a full head of garlic and I'll simmer it slowly in canola oil or olive oil for like 45 minutes or so until the garlic completely gets soft, soft, soft. And what happens is that it infuses the flavor of the garlic all throughout the oil, and it keeps for a while. Like I've had this batch for the past few weeks and have no problems with any off flavors or anything else like that. It seems to be working just fine. If you can hear off camera, I'm pouring some water into a glass because I'm thirsty and I need some water. So this is real time, folks. See how they're starting to sizzle like that? That's what you're looking for. You don't want them to be violently boiling in the oil. You want them to be gently kind of sizzling in there. And I don't need to take them to like super duper dark brown. I just want them to be toasted so that they're not having that like raw peanut taste that I don't much care for. So we're going to get these guys out of there. No, that's not working. Let's try the much beaten up slotted spoon, see if that works. Yes, there we go. And to be honest, we're probably not going to need these peanuts for a while, almost till the end of cooking, because you do want that contrast between the mushiness of the pongal, the rice and the beans, and the crunch of those peanuts. It's a really nice contrast. So I'm just going to set these guys aside for now, but we'll be back. We'll see them again. So now that the oil is fragrant with even the peanuts, let's be honest, let's go ahead and do the spices. So I'm doing a little bit of mustard seed just because I care. I do like it. And some sesame seed. And of course the required cumin seed. And you can hear it cracking and popping like mad. That is good. That's what we want. And then I'm going to add some asafoetida. I like a fair bit in there. That's a personal taste preference. You don't have to quite go as crazy as I did. Alright, now in with our curry leaves. They're smelling good. And then we're going to add the ginger. You don't want the ginger to cook too terribly much, but you do want to get some of that sharpness off of it. So I'm just giving it like a few seconds. That should be more than enough, because I did grate it on my microflame, so it did get grated fairly finely, which is what you're looking for. And now traditionally when you're cooking the dal, you would actually add, if you're regular South Indian, you would add the turmeric to the dal while it's cooking, but I don't much care for that boiled turmeric flavor. I prefer it to be, deep fried in oil. I find that flavor a lot more pleasing. And now the rice doesn't want to come out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to park you guys here for a second. And I'm just going to scrape it out with a spoon. I don't know why the rice decides to be stubborn now that I'm on camera. It was working just fine earlier. Alright, that's fine. So in goes the rice. And I'm going to rinse out this bowl with water as well as the dal bowl. So in with the dal. And now, traditionally, by volume, your proportion of rice to dal would be 2 parts rice to 1 part dal. I'm trying to make this a little bit on the healthier side, so instead of doing 2 parts rice to 1 part dal, by volume, I just did 1 to 1 so that, I could boost the amount of protein that I'm getting in there, make it a little bit more nutritious. Traditionally, Pongal is more of like a peasant dish. It's like a staple food that's eaten pretty much the year round, and it's not a fancy thing. I'm sure you've seen restaurants where they do have it on the menu. They might call it khichdi because that's the North Indian version of it, where they add all kinds of crazy things to it, like I'm doing. And And that's fine. Those are also delicious, but I'm trying to stick to the basic-ish version, just with a little bit more protein for my needs, just because I don't really need to be eating quite as much rice as I'm eating. Doctor basically said, you know, your blood work is not looking great. Let's get that under control. I want you to up your intake of beans and dark leafy green vegetables and, you know, other things like that. So not a death sentence, because I actually do like beans and dark leafy green vegetables, so that's not entirely a bad thing. But in that spirit is why I started to try different grains. I've made pongal before with bulgur. That works perfectly well. I've made it with, what's this one, quinoa before. That also works really nicely. This time I'm trying the red cargo rice to see if, you know, the different texture of rice would work out if I just cook it a little bit longer and take it a little bit further. Actually, you know what, I'm going to crank up the heat a bit, because this isn't coming to a boil quite as fast as I'd like it to. And you may notice that the dal has some clumps in it. That's fine. It's probably just going to cook out. Worst comes to it, we can always add more water and whisk it through, and it'll all come to rights soon enough. So this is going, starting to come up to a boil a lot faster now that I added that extra heat to the stove. The reason I switched to the whisk is because I wanted to break up a few of those clumps and see if I can, you know, get this behaving itself a little bit better for you guys at home. But it doesn't seem to quite want to cooperate yet. So adding some extra water. I don't have exact measurements. Essentially, you want enough water that you can do this, that it looks like a soup at this point, because it's going to cook down for a while. Pongal is, like I said, traditionally you cook the rice and the dal together, which avoids the dal from getting clumpy like it is right here. I just wanted to try something different and see if it would work, because I have a rice cooker and a pressure cooker, so I figured, you know, let's just get this done a little bit faster, because if you try to cook the dal and the rice together in the pressure cooker, in the rice cooker, the dal has so much starch that it makes like this bubbly mess that gets all over the place, and it's not a pleasant look. Excuse me, that was a water break. It's not a pleasant look, because what ends up happening is that it bubbles up all over your kitchen counter and it makes a giant nasty mess. And rather than going through all that aggravation, I figured let's just cook them separately, because brown rice on the stovetop I haven't had any luck with. I don't much care for it, because I find that it comes out either uncooked or overcooked, to the point of mushiness and grossness. Now mind you, mushiness would not have been entirely a bad thing in this particular situation, but I also wanted to have some, you know, brown rice for stir fries and other things like that I wanted to try out later this week. So that's why I just shoved it in the rice cooker, because the rice cooker always does it perfectly. And I do have one of those fancy Fuzzy Logic rice cookers with the induction heating and everything else like that. It went from 0 to brown rice in exactly 45 minutes. It wasn't 45 minutes once it hit the pressure. It wasn't 45 minutes after the rice comes to the boil. It was 45 minutes on the timer, and it counted down minute by minute until 45 minutes was done, and then the rice was cooked to perfection. So I feel like that was money well spent. I'm quite happy with that purchase. So this is still coming to a boil. Good Lord, this is taking forever. But it's good, because it's giving me time to break up some of these dal clumps, which I don't much care for having, you know, all clumpy like that. That's not great. There we go, there we go, there we go. And honestly, I'm not that fussed about it that I need this to be perfectly homogenized. If I get a couple of clumps of dal, it's not the end of the world, it's fine. So I'm gonna let this come up to the boil, and then once it comes to the boil, we're gonna drop it down to a simmer and let it just park for about 20 minutes or so. If this were traditional pongal, where you're doing the rice and the dal together, and you're actually using white rice like, you know, the traditional recipe calls for, you would start par cooking the dal first. You want to give it about like 10 minutes at the boil, then you add the rice and let the two of those guys go together for about another 25 minutes or so. And it'll be pretty much exactly that texture that you want, that slight mushiness, that very comforting sort of, you know, that rounded quality that mushy food has sometimes. So you see it's coming up, it's starting to simmer, so we're starting to get there, which is pretty good. The reason I'm stirring is that even though this is a non-stick pan, I don't want it to stick to the bottom and catch, which Pongal will do. If you try to use aluminium or stainless steel or something like that, or even a pressure cooker, to be honest, Pongal is notorious for catching on the bottom and frequently burning because of the amount of starch that the rice and the dal have combined. It sticks to the bottom like glue, and it is a pain to clean off. So, like, rather than ruin my pan, I'd rather, you know, take out some insurance by stirring constantly. And I'm starting to get to the point, like, I'm on full heat. It's just taking its sweet time to get to that heat. No worries, it'll get there when it gets there. I'll keep an eye on this guy. Now, traditional accompaniments for Pongal are coconut chutney, and that's something that you're more than welcome to make as a side. There is a recipe in the book. For this one, I'm probably going to serve it with some vegetables that I just, you know, give a quick steam or something like that, because this has so much flavor from all the different spices and the ginger and now the garlic oil, to be honest, that I don't necessarily want something too terribly strongly flavored as an accompaniment. And like all starches at the beginning of cooking, I did add salt to both of the, you know, cookings. But I'm going to add just a little bit more salt just to round out the flavors here. That is kosher salt, by the way, so it seems like I'm adding more than I actually am. The grains are much fluffier, so like what you would add in table salt would be far less if you're using table salt, or if you're using a different brand of kosher salt. I'm using Diamond kosher salt, which has very light and fluffy crystals. If you're using something like a Morton kosher salt, you want to use much, much less salt than you just saw me add in there, because you're looking for the thing to be seasoned, not a salt bomb. Alright, so I am scraping down the sides a little bit, just getting everything nice and together. And if you notice, listen to the bubbles. Can you hear that? They don't sound like bubbles that you would get in a soup. They sound more like bubbles that you would get in like a gravy or something like that, which means that the starches have basically flooded the water in this guy. So if I let it go much longer, we're going to have that issue of sticking and making messes and getting caught and all the rest of it. So instead of letting it go at a full rolling boil at this point, I'm just dropping down the heat to as low as the stove will go. And once the furious bubbling, you know, calms down a bit, what we can do is cover the lid and let it park for the next 15-20 minutes and come back to it and see where it's going. See how the bubbles have calmed down a bit? They're still there. They're still breaking the surface, but it's not as loud, right? So they're a lot calmer than they were when we got this whole party started. So I'm fairly happy with where we are. This is a good place to be. And most of those dal clumps are breaking up, so it'll continue to break down as the pongal cooks together. Now, if you were doing this from scratch with brown rice, you know, where you cook the dal and the rice together, mung dal and brown rice will cook around the same amount of time. So, like, you can actually add them together and let it really, you know, come to a nice rushing boil, drop it down to a simmer, and then let it just like kind of park in there for about 45 minutes or so. But because I haven't used this red cargo rice before, I wanted to just pre-cook it just so that it's done to perfection. The other reason why I wanted to do this method is that I wanted to show you guys that you can use the leftovers. So if you have some boiled dal just lying around, just like plain dal, which is a thing that a lot of South Indian homes have, is that they'll cook up a big batch of plain dal in the pressure cooker with nothing, maybe a little bit of turmeric to give it some flavor and some color, maybe a little bit of salt, not much, and then they use it throughout the week. So like if you're making a rasam, you take a little bit of that plain dal and you add it to the same tarka that we did, the cumin seed, mustard seeds, curry leaves, add a tomato, add maybe some I don't know, some cilantro stems or whatever to just like give it some nice flavor, and then add the rasam spice blend. It's like a masala. The recipe's in the book, but if you Google for rasam powder, there's a million and a half recipes out there. They're all it's a fairly basic, simple recipe that most people have on hand. You add some rasam powder and let it come to a boil, and then finish it off with some lime juice or lemon juice and some cilantro leaves and whatever. And it's a really delicious soup to have in the middle of the week. Sometimes you take that dal and you make sambar out of it, which is sort of like a gravy situation with a whole bunch of vegetables in it. And this is another thing that you can do with your leftover plain dal, is that you combine it with some leftover rice, add a couple of spices, add some ginger, add some water, and just let it come to a full rushing boil, drop it down to a simmer, and just let them cook together. And that way you don't have to eat the same thing 50 times. Like you can have components of a meal. So like basically have some boiled rice in the fridge at all times, have some boiled dal sitting in the fridge at all times, and then just combine the dal with various other flavorings and come up with ways to use up your meal preps. It's a really handy way to obsessed with having everything fresh. You could never eat leftovers, but South Indians in the United States have grown to adapt with our refrigeration and microwaves and other things like that. And I have a lot of admiration for those South Indian cooks in the US who are using the things that we have to the best of their advantage. And this is just one of those adaptations that I want to give you guys so that you have sort of easy ways to make midweek Indian meals. So let's let this park. You see that the lid is starting to fog up, but not too terribly fast, which is fine. That's what we're looking for. We want a low, gentle simmer. Let's let this park for about 25 minutes or so, and we will come back and take a look at our progress.
Okay, and we're back. As you can see, the pepper is ground fairly coarsely. It's not that fine powdery pepper that you get. You do want to use freshly ground because the flavor of the pepper is extremely important for Pongal. It's one of the sort of markers of a good pongal is the flavor of that pepper. And in South India, what they'll frequently do is that when they fry the cumin seeds in oil, they'll add whole black peppercorns and fry it along with the oil and the cumin seeds, and then they dump that on top of the cooked beans and rice and stir it through at the absolute end. It keeps the spices a lot fresher tasting, but because I don't like biting into whole black peppercorns, I'm doing it this way. I find it deeply unpleasant, and I do not care for it. It's like if the spice is a lot bigger than a cumin seed, I probably don't want to bite into it. This includes cloves, it includes cardamom. Most of those spices, which I find deeply obnoxious, are larger than a cumin seed, and they're left whole inside the food. And then I bite into it, and it's very shocking, and it's very jarring, and I don't care for that experience. If you don't mind biting into whole black pepper, live your life. I'm not here to tell you how to do that. And if you prefer the fresher taste of a tarka added at the absolute last minute, then cook the beans and rice together until they're the perfect consistency with the amount of water that you want. You don't want this to be terribly thick. You want it to be sort of like borderline risotto. You're not looking for polenta texture, you're looking for closer to like a risotto texture where it's a little bit more slumpy. There is some liquid to it. Some people do like theirs to be slightly thicker, but I do prefer that slightly looser texture because I find it easier to eat. But again, you can sort of customize this to your liking. Like I said, I'm not making the traditional version, I'm making my version, which is how I like it. And to be honest, even with brown rice, I think we've come out pretty successful. I did taste it off camera. It is very, very lovely. It's very comforting. It's very like soothing to the soul sort of thing. And it's a rainy day outside today, so I am taking advantage of all the comfort that I can get my way. So hopefully this gives you guys some inspiration as to try something different out and see if you like it. Let me know in the comments what you thought and if you tried it out. Thanks. Bye.